I'm not quite sure who my audience is, and so if I end up heading down a pathway that you go, why is he going down that pathway and this is really boring? Stick your hand up and we can talk about anything you want. I am very flexible about this, but there we go. So I'm Kurt Holzer. I'm a member of the Bike Law Network of Attorneys. What's Bike Law? We are attorneys from across the country. Most of my colleagues are on the Blue Ridge Parkway right now at our National Bike Law Lawyers Summit, doing a group bike ride across the Blue Ridge Parkway. So I'm sort of jealous. I had other reasons I couldn't go, but I would say it's because I'm here, but that would be a lie. Who work together across the state, across states, throughout the nation, representing cyclists in all sorts of ways. We're not this. What we are, this is the modern view of what the heck is a lawyer. These are the things that we as an organization do. Some advocacy and training. This kind of falls in the training part. Community support. I get regular calls from folks about how does this work in the law. And Representative Wintrow is next door, one side or the other, talking about how to make things work in the legislature. We've worked a bunch in the legislature over time. Cyclists who get charged with various nefarious activities contact me. I do a little bit of criminal representation. I have a couple of criminal lawyers who I work with more closely. Mostly what my role is I'm a civil lawyer representing folks who are injured in car v bike incidents or similar incidents. That's really who and what I am. I'm also the little piece of the cycling cult that I fall in is the lycra-clad racing geeks. I'm one of those. I often say my favorite day of the year, if anybody's here in Boise in the summer, our biggest downtown event is the Boise Twilight Criterium. I raced it for many years, and I've been announcing it for almost 10 years now. I get to stand on a podium and talk about bike racing for 6 hours to an audience. It's so awesome. I get to listen to myself talk about bicycles. That's the best day of the year. Here's all I'm doing. Here's what I have planned for this little presentation, which is to kind of go over the basics. And everybody here might go, well, this is stupid. We know all the basics about where we should ride and how we should ride. And then to answer sort of the three biggest questions that I get from cyclists, is this okay? So once again, if you want to interrupt me, if you want to change the direction of this conversation, that's fine. This is the ball I picked up with and I'm running with. So the basics, right? What's a bike? It's just another vehicle. And cyclists, this is one of the things, as cyclists, the thing that pisses motorists off is when we don't follow these rules. This is the thing when I'm driving a car and I see the guy with the half rack in his basket riding the wrong way on State Street. That's the guy I hate. When I see the kid whose mom is teaching him to ride against traffic, I have stopped and had conversations with those people before and talked about what you need to do, why we need to do it, what the law is. And then, of course, obey traffic controls. We don't get to just treat the road like whatever we want it to be. Obviously, this is Idaho. There's a caveat. We'll talk about that caveat in a minute. The basics of operating any vehicle on the road is to operate it with due care. And that is that's the rubric that Idaho law really operates under. If you look at what's the basic rule, operate it with due care. And we're talking about motor vehicles, they refer to the basic rule as drive the speed that's safe under the circumstance. That's what the lawyers talk about. I think that the real rubric is operate with due care. And so what does that mean? It's not defined. And when we interact with law enforcement, particularly in this arena, everybody's going to have opinions about what's due care in the circumstance. I, as a cyclist, may perceive something I'm doing as absolutely safe and fine, and I have evaluated the situation and the risk and what I'm going to accomplish and say, this is clearly due care. Somebody driving their, half-ton Ford pickup may not think that, and somebody driving a car with flashing lights on the roof may not think that I have done that as well. So there is discretion in the law. There is no definition that says what is due care. It's a subjective evaluation that you have to fight your way through at times. We don't have much special, there are states over the last decade or so, we've started to see more and more special statutory enactments for dealing with cyclists on the road. We've seen it Delaware to California, Florida to Washington State. We haven't really seen it in Idaho, but these are sort of the three big areas that we've seen it. One's a vulnerable road user statute. I think there may be a potential for that in Idaho, maybe at some point in time. Last time we tried it in the legislature, our biggest barrier was Marv Hagedorn, who decided that if we were going to get that way, what we were going to have to do is single file on all roads all the time, and that's obviously not a trade-out that's possible to be done. That's somebody who doesn't ride bikes is just not thinking, doesn't understand. But a vulnerable road user statute, because that encompasses all users, walkers, runners, people using alternative, whether wheelchairs, what have you. Anybody who's not in a car can be protected, a horse rider can be protected under a vulnerable road user statute. And that's the type of thing that we might have the capacity to get to establish what are the rules for interacting with vulnerable road users. There's a bunch of models out there. So it's an area for a change in the, I think that's a little bit ripe for change in the law, maybe picks up a little bit on what Don was saying and here, sort of the other side of the equation. Go ahead. Anybody who's not in a car, who's on a road, a wheelchair, a bicycle, a cyclist, a runner, you name it. You name anybody. We can get, what was that? Skateboarder, scooters, anybody who is not protected by the big cage, essentially. And you can bring those in. You get an interesting coalition. You bring in the equestrian community to start advocating for good law that helps protect them, because there are times, you see them out there on Cartwright Road or out there at the end of Eagle Road and Walnut. I'm sure all over the state, downtown Meridian. Yeah, you see horses all over the place. And so, you can create a coalition of advocates in the legislature that may move folks who haven't thought about something like that into that arena. They are as well. Absolutely. That's right. No special protections from harassment. This is one that cyclists, you talk to anybody who spends substantial time on the road, they have a story of strafed by a car, thrown at an empty Coke bottle, thrown at them, spit at, verbally harassed, the horn right behind them. What we get here back is there are already laws on the books for harassment. You don't need this special one. Of course, the cops don't enforce anything that's on the books now in that setting. So what you want to do is give them a tool. And that's what statutes are. They're tools for law enforcement to enforce and change behavior. Are we going to get one of those in Idaho? That one I would say we're never going to see, or not until there's a big sea change. And then no defined passing distance. There's sort of the biggest one nationally, 3 feet to pass, but there are also Maryland. Somebody has 5 feet to pass. What you see in other countries is 1 meter to pass, which is a little over 3 feet. And there's one state that has a change lanes if possible standard, which is and what are these really? These are really ways to define due care. Right? It gives you a statutory definition of what is due care in the circumstance. 3 feet's not enough, right? It really isn't enough. But it says, all right, this is the in the balancing act that we try to do, or you have to do in a legislative process. That's the one, and it has some sexy to it. And of course, it's been shot down 3 times in the Idaho legislature. The best chance we ever had was 2010, and the trucking lobby came in and killed it. Is what happened, plain and simple. Why? Trucking lobby is in here dumping money into the legislators' pockets. Did I just say that? Does that sound cynical? Cyclists aren't. Right, and there's some real truth to that, right? How do you impact your legislator? You get to know them. It doesn't take much to. I'm not going to say this. Yes, I am. It doesn't take much to buy an Idaho legislator. They don't need much money, right? It's getting to be more expensive. We just saw in this primary how much money they're spending on the gubernatorial race, and you're going to see some $75,000 and $100,000 is my estimate of some of the more competitive legislative seats, particularly in this ring around Boise. But a $50 or $100 donation to a legislator opens a door and gives you a chance to talk to them. And really, it humanizes you in a way. And even somebody whose public positions are things that make you cringe on any end of the spectrum, even in the middle of the spectrum sometime. If you sit down with that person often, there are probably a couple examples in the Idaho legislature where this isn't true, but often you will find there are places to find common ground, and they are acting from a concern for what they think is a proper society, and you have the chance, and when you talk to them, to explain to them why this makes a better society, it works better. So that's my little pitch for get involved in the legislative process. More basics, right? Where do you have to ride? Far to the right is practicable. What the hell does that mean, right? Some cop's not going to know what it means. I mean, they want to interpret it as far to the right as possible. If you look at the dictionary, it'll say practicable means possible. So they have a basis for that argument. We also look at lots of history of the law, and we find that practicable means, what's reasonable in the context. And I think that if you're dealing with this as a matter of somebody's pursuing you because of a ticket some cop gave you, and the argument is what was practicable, you start talking about safety, where I was, why I positioned myself here on the roadway, and you're going to ultimately prevail on that, even if that fight ends up having to go to these 5 people over here because they're pretty reasonable over at the Supreme Court, even if the magistrate judges aren't and some of the DJs aren't. Most of the DJs are. Some of the magistrate judges are. We have a list of times when it is expressly allowed not to ride far to the right as practicable. That list does really give weight, however, to this idea that law enforcement often uses, which it means possible, because it defines, it says as far as right as practicable unless these things. So practicable must mean you have to move over. So there is a argument. There's a rational argument on the what I would call the wrong side of this statute, but it's there. And then, I think the most interesting one. Go ahead. Yeah, sure. How about that? That's the most interesting one. What does it mean? Go ahead. What a Shero essentially says is you have a substandard lane and you can take the lane. That's my interpretation of what a Shero is in place. There is a lot of research that shows Sheros do not increase safety. They decrease safety because people don't know what your average driver doesn't have the slightest idea what a Shero is, right? What the hell is this, right? They just, but and there's not that many places where we have them in the areas I ride in Boise City. I mean, there are a few obvious places that we have them, but and it's the whole. You get into that whole argument of what do you do with the share the lane signs, share the road signs. I hate it. Share the road is the most idiotic campaign in the history of the world, because what you have is motorists yelling at the cyclists, "Move over, share the lane, get out of my, share the road," right? I'm an advocate and a believer in bikes may use full lane, right? That sign tells people what the rules are in a way simple way. And so maybe, you know, there can be some changes within the people who control the signage in the roadways to move that way. And we do see that. And we're seeing more of that. I know they've moved that way, and Napa Highway 1 has moved that way. And I know there are other places in the state that are. Jim? Well, you can do that. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's I don't think that there is a perception problem that cars can't use the full lane. However, it's an entitlement thing. It is an entitlement thing. Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I think that. Yeah, no, I think that is the average, maybe not the average, but there are certainly a substantial number of drivers who believe that way, that it's just, you know, this is an inappropriate use of our roadways. And that's cultural, right? And that's part of what this whole conference is all about. And part of what I assume everyone in here has some measure of, you know, what can I do to change the culture to make cycling a more accepted everyday behavior. And, you know, we're in a unique place. Boise, the Treasure Valley, I assume it's throughout the state, but the Treasure Valley is a unique place that is moving in that direction, right? Miles to go. It ain't no Portland, but Portland has its own set of issues. Anyway, what does it mean, too narrow for a bicycle and motor vehicle to travel safely? Does that mean you have to have 3 feet between you? Does that mean it has to be a 12-foot wide lane? You're as far right as possible. You got 3 feet. You got your 8-foot wide car. I'm not 100% sure what it means. What I think it means is that I, as a cyclist, have a subjective decision to determine whether I can travel safely with a car next to me in the same lane. And if not, I can take the lane because that lane is substandard. You can look. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that comes with comfort and time, no question about it. I am somebody who has many miles on the bike, on the road, interactions with a lot of folks. It is it's a very subjective standard, but you have the right to not be as far to the right as practicable if you can't travel safely next to a car. Which, you know, there's a message there to people who build, design, and approve roadways. What do we want this road to accomplish? What are we asking for all our road users, cyclists, obviously pedestrians, everybody? But that's the, you know, focusing on cyclists here. It's once again, there's a lot of discretion in interpreting that. So we're dealing with, the question is, what does the police officer think at the moment he interacts with you if you're on your bike in the lane, not all the way to far to the right as possible? How's that police officer going to interpret it? Right? Are you going to win that argument on the roadway? No, you're not going to win that argument on the roadway. You might win that argument in the courtroom, though. Right? And we have won that argument in the courtroom more than once. Go ahead. This is, you know, I actually kind of put a little bit of failure on myself. You know, we're pretty lucky in Boise City because we have there's a core number of the Boise bike cops, and then cops who have been through that program and are back on patrol, who have a good sense of this stuff. But, you know, once you're in Ada County, that changes. Once you're out in any other city, you don't really have much of that. And, you know, I've been telling myself for probably 10 years, I really need to reach out to law enforcement and start doing some training sessions, and I don't do it. So if anybody wants to force me into doing one of those, has some connections, and wants to make it happen, I'll say yes. I just probably won't set it up for myself. It's kind of like I said yes to Cynthia about this thing. All right. So this is one of those areas, of discretion. You know, this is one of those things you get yelled at from cars. Single file, right? When do I have to be in single file? Well, as long as I'm not harassing the normal and reasonable movement of traffic. What the heck does that mean? Because the normal and reasonable movement of traffic includes, in this great state, plows, motorcycles, and four-wheelers, and and equestrians and hikers, and everybody is involved in are part of traffic. Does it mean that a vehicle can drive the speed limit unencumbered? A car can drive the speed limit unencumbered at all times. That's not the normal and reasonable movement of traffic. That's not really what happens. Now, are there times when cars can unencumbered drive the speed limit? Sure. And if that's the situation and there's two of you blocking the road, well, that's a problem. And in Boise City, right, the rule's different, right? You do have to single file up in Boise City if you're slowing down a car and they can't get around you safely. That was when we were going through that process of adopting those in 11, 12. When was that? 12, Pat? In 2012, that was one of the ones that some of us were jumping up and down about. But there has to be balance. You have to consider all sides. Both sides must be considered. So that was one of those statutes. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure what normal and reasonable movement of traffic is. I have a friend who is for Department of Transportation, he is an inspector on their projects, right? These big projects, he's the guy who goes out and makes sure they pour the concrete right, all that stuff, who is a bike commuter, who his take is the normal and reasonable movement of traffic is slow. Therefore, I can ride my bike wherever the hell I want. He's also the person I know who's been hit by cars more than any other single individual I know. I've been hit, I think, 7 times by a car. Yeah, none of them have been very serious, but yeah. Yeah, okay, and I assume everybody knows about the Idaho Stop. I don't have to talk to you about the Idaho Stop. It's now not only the Idaho Stop, it's the Delaware Stop, it's the Colorado Stop. It was almost the San Francisco Stop, but the mayor didn't like it. It's been passed in 2 other states where governors have vetoed it. It's coming. It's the right thing because it's the right behavior. This is on the cyclist side. The thing that drives me crazy is the cyclists who treat it as we don't have to pay any attention to, right? This is the same. Those people are no different than the guy with the half rack riding the wrong way on State Street. They're just as much the people who make the motorists hate you, right? But this is cultural learning stuff, and you see it. My favorite thing is to have gone a slow and ride through a stop sign, and then somebody with a Montana plate or a California plate yells at you out the window, "Stop at the stop sign." Okay, it's all right. You don't know where you are, but it's real behavior. It's behavior that happens everywhere, regardless of what the law is, and I don't need to go into all the reasons for it. Let's see, but there's this, right? Certain laws have exceptions, right? Stop signs have exceptions. Stoplights have exceptions. The pain of it all, there's no exceptions to the car hurts. Right? All right, so these are the things that I get questions about all the time. Is it legal to ride under the influence? Kinda. There is no such thing as public intoxication in Idaho. It's illegal public intoxication. 39.710 or something says you can't have a pure public intoxication. Merely you are under arrest because you're drunk. The '08 standard doesn't apply, right? The measurement that you use for a vehicle doesn't apply because driving under the influence, operating a motor vehicle under the influence is a motor vehicle, and a bike isn't a motor vehicle if you go through all the definitions in the code. Electric bikes are motor vehicles. They are motor vehicles. But under Idaho code has defined it as a motor vehicle. Again, you have to put about 4 codes together to get there. And you know what? It's always okay to be drunk on a sidewalk. Always. I'm just telling you, it is. The pedestrian statute, the pedestrian drunk in public statute says you're not allowed to be drunk walking in the roadway, but it's okay to be drunk walking on the sidewalk. And if you're on a bicycle on a sidewalk, you're a pedestrian, and the pedestrian rules apply. So it's okay to be drunk. It's a heck of a question. I don't know the answer to that. If you're a pedestrian, is that? Well, I don't know what that's considered. I think that would be considered the roadway. It's a heck of a. That's the type of thing that would make judges pull their hair out. And there's a but here. There are local standards that exist and they can enforce them, and they are behavioral standards, right? If you're so drunk you're riding your bike, you're going to run into somebody, they can get you for that. And Boise City has a reckless cycling statute. You know, if you're just riding fast down the sidewalk, Boise City has a reckless cycling statute. But again, there it is. 39310 says you can't get them on a sidewalk unless you have, just for being drunk. So that's the answer to, can I ride my bike drunk? Yeah. I'd rather you were going home from the bar on your bike than in your car. All right. Is it legal to filter? Can I pass on the right? Right. This is a question I get all the time. Can I? You know, this is the cars are stopped at the stop sign. It's you know, can I pass on the right? So, using the pavement, available pavement to the right of stopped or slow moving traffic to advance my bike in front of them. Right. Cops will tell you no. Cops are wrong. Yes, it's legal to filter under appropriate circumstances. Who has the right of way? The vehicle, the non-passing vehicle. The vehicle. If the vehicle's in front and he's turning right, this cyclist is here, that vehicle has the right of way. Because you're sharing that lane with them. Yeah. Right? If they don't, right? We'll get to civil stuff, because that's really civil stuff. You have to be able to do it safely, right? You can only pass if it's safe. That is part of the filter. Are you allowed to pass on the right? Only if you can do it safely. If you can't pass safely, they're turning, you're in the wrong. The pavement is sufficient width for 2 or more lines of moving vehicles. This is kind of the essence of this thing. If you go, where's the bike supposed to ride? As far to the right as practicable, it's assumed they're going to be sharing a lane. We have 2 or more lines of moving vehicles. This is why it is legal to filter. If you combine 49.717 and 49.633, you're not going to be convicted of a crime for passing a car on the right as long as you've done it safely. So
they're starting to.
when you say those kind of lanes, what do you mean by those kind of lanes? Just we're expanding, the DOT is expanding the size of the pavement and lining it differently. The idea here is not really right. It is, you can be the shoulder. The idea really here is that you can do it in the lane, right? The lane captures 2. It's supposed to capture you as far to the right as practicable in the lane, right? Not necessarily on the shoulder. In the lane, car can get by you. You can get by the car. Is it legal? Yes. Might some cop say you're violating that sign? Yeah, they might do that, and then you end up with chatting with some magistrates again. Can it be flipped? Sure. Would it be flipped? Probably not. I mean, the issue is, can you impose a violation on that person? Right, because it's the car that has to give the cyclist 3 feet. The car has to give a cyclist 3 feet to pass. The cyclist doesn't have to give a car 3 feet to pass. That's not the way the code is written. Yeah, if you if you feel safe.
I don't want, but.
So that's RUI filtering. Can I ride on the sidewalk? You know, these are the. The one that people fail on often is, anytime you pass anybody, if you're on your bike on a sidewalk, you have to give an audible signal. Code says it, whether it's your ding ding or on your left or on your right. And on your left is that scary one, right? On your left, and they do this every time, right? Particularly if you're people not used to seeing cyclists or dealing with cyclists. And there are some cities. I know Coeur d'Alene bans bikes downtown. I think there might be a couple more in the state that do. Local cities on the sidewalks, yeah. Yeah, doesn't matter. Either side of the street, doesn't matter. If you're on, the basic rule is if you're on the sidewalk, the pedestrian rules apply. In Boise City, you have to yield to all pedestrians. Boise City has that, I think. Yield to all pedestrians. Yield to everybody, essentially. It's like you're downhill mountain biker in the foothills. Yield to everybody. I put the Boise stuff up. They just adopted the e-bikes here this last year. The simple e-bikes, the ones that don't have the twisty throttles, limited speed. They fall within. Boise City treats them as bicycles under the bicycle rules. It's the no twisty, right? You don't have control over it, and 20-mile-an-hour limit, I think. So that's not all that interesting. All right, so this is what I really do is I sue people when cars run over folks on bicycles. So I'll talk about that for a second. Liability world is a world of negligence, right? It's the statute we're talking about, that criminal stuff. They can sort of establish, what is the right act, what is the appropriate behavior, and you're fighting over who was negligent. I mean, what's the number one? Me looking at somebody who's been hit by a car and saying, sorry, that's not a claim. Riding the wrong way on the roadway, and a car who does not expect them and should not be expected to expect them turns into them, right? The one that's harder is the cyclist on the sidewalk riding opposite flow. So cars are expected to look for folks that way, for pedestrians that way, but pedestrians are walking at 4 miles an hour. The bike's coming at 15. They look once, they think it's safe, they turn in. Those are harder cases, right? The issue of comparative fault in negligence cases. If you're run over and you have $100 in medical expenses and your $100 bike is broken and it's 100% the driver's fault, they have to pay both $100. But comparative fault says, how much responsibility do you yourself as the injured person have for the incident? And that's what we ask juries to do all the time. Apportion fault. There's 100% responsibility. How much is on the injured person? How much is on the bad guy? There has to have been somebody doing something wrong, and you will see, I've seen in cases this riding the wrong way on the sidewalk. Jury will say, well, you have to be extra careful because you're going faster, so it's 25% your fault. In which case, the person only recovers 75% of their expenses and $75 towards their bike. So there's an apportionment of responsibility there. The tough thing happens, two tough things happen in bike cases. Idaho law says if it's half your fault and half the bad guy's fault, you, injured person, get nothing. Zero, right? So bad guy did half the fault, but he has no responsibility for you. And there's this view that I have heard from the jury box more than once. Well, you got out there on the roadway, so you took the risk, so some of it's your fault anyway. Right? This is a concept that we had in the law called assumption of the risk. It doesn't apply in Idaho formally, but does it apply in the jury room? Absolutely. Right? And so when I'm trying one of these cases, this is one of the things I have to deal with. How do I persuade you that this is okay, that the cyclist is the good guy, the driver is the bad guy? Wrestling with that issue. And even if they don't formally say it's 20% your fault just because you were on the road, if the judge lets them do that, they'll go, well, he might have been hurt $100, but I'm only going to give him 50 because he was on a bike, not in a car. Right? You get that kind of decision out of juries too. That's the problem of comparative fault. Insurance, I was going to put a little devil next to the insurance thing. Kind of ties in with depreciated values, right? You're on your fancy $5,000 bike. It gets run over and destroyed. The insurance company says, well, it's 2 years old, so it's only worth $2,000, right? That'd be same. It's absolutely true with your Toyota Corolla because there's a million Toyota Corollas out there and you can go buy another one. There isn't a secondary market for bikes. There is not a supportable secondary market or a guaranteed secondary market for bikes. I can go get a 3-year-old Camry and have a good idea of what I'm getting. I can't go get a 3-year-old carbon fiber bicycle and have a good idea of what I'm getting. This is a place I have big fights with insurance companies when people on really nice, fine pieces of machinery get run over. It's a huge fight. The outcome is all over the place based on what does the client want to do, how good is the fight. But the real issue is there is no secondary market for this stuff. I mean, there's no secondary market for how do you depreciate a helmet? It's either good or you need a new one, right? There is no, you can't, it's 2 years old, so it's only worth half price. No, it's worth nothing. It's either worth nothing or it's worth everything. Sure. Oh, all the time. I've never seen that issue of you took your own fault, get on the go drive. Yeah, I've never seen that. I mean, you do see, yeah, you see comparative fault issues. In fact, I just had one kid doing a U-turn on Hay Street. Another kid goes to pass the kid who's doing a U-turn on Hay Street, right? It's a no passing zone. It's illegal to do a U-turn, right? That's a classic comparative fault setting. And neither kid was hurt very badly, so. No. It's assumed that it's what Jim was saying. It's assumed that you are given the right, you are taking advantage of our goodwill to have your bike for whatever reason you're on the road, whether it's transportation or recreation, and you know that you're at risk, and you haven't put a big cage around you and gone and bought some gas and used it. So therefore, this is the mentality. You can't be surprised by this mentality. This is the mentality. And so this is in the jury selection process. This is one of the areas that I'm looking for, is finding people who think that, right? Because my role is advocating for a cyclist in the courtroom. My role is to get rid of these people who I can't change their opinion in the courtroom. There's nothing I can do to change somebody's opinion when they've passed 500 cyclists. One of them swerved in front of them. One of them was going the wrong way. They're all a bunch of lawbreakers. Right. I mean, there's the problem with the one bad cyclist is that's the one remembered. Right. I mean, we've all been out there. 98 to 99% of the drivers are awesome. Right. And respectful and decent. And, if anything, too nice. Oh, you go. Please just go through the stop sign and I can control my speed. You're really not helping me by sitting there waiting for me. You're just trying to be nice. I know, but it's a pain in my ass. The vast majority of drivers are really decent, right? But we remember the assholes, right? I mean, that's just how it is, and that's that's the driver's experience too. And there's less cyclists.
Just a quick question.
Sure. I can think of one cyclist who was on one jury of an ire in the years I've been doing this. I've probably tried 6 or 7 cycling cases. One cyclist, and the defense kicked him off. I mean, one person who identified as a regular cyclist. Blaine County. They are of the same idea. The idea of contributory negligence really means if you have any responsibility at all, you recover nothing. That means if you're 1% at fault, you get nothing. There's only 1 or 2 states in the country that have that any longer. Comparative fault was the regime that replaced it in whenever that was, in the 70s and 80s across the country. And so there's different ways that comparative fault exists. The one we have says if you're equally at fault, you recover nothing. Insurance companies, double recorded statements and admissions. When you're talking to the bad guys, insurance company recognize they have no duty to you. This is the hardest people don't quite get this. They're not your friends. They're not your good neighbors. You're not in good hands when they represent the other guy. Right? What they're doing is they're looking for things to use against you. And here's what people really do when they talk to insurance companies, because they live their lives like they normally do, which is they minimize, and they poo-poo. They poo-poo their own injuries. They minimize the responsibility of the bad guy. It's because they're decent people, right? Because that's how we interact with one another. Because most people want to look forward, don't want to worry about their injuries, aren't a bunch of whiners. And the insurance companies know it, and they ask you questions to use against you, and then you try to, when you realize the scope, severity of your situation, they say, but a week after the wreck, you said, I'm doing really good. Well, I've had 6 surgeries since then, right? So insurance companies bad. Be careful if you talk to them. Be careful of your admissions. And social biases is what we were talking about, what folks think. There you go. That's what I had when talking about bike law, but I'm here to answer anything else, to talk about anything else. There's another 5 minutes. I started 5 minutes late. I'm finishing 5 minutes early. I'm the good guy.